Your book is amazing.
Thank you.
You know, and I say this as a psychologist who works with people who are surviving from a range of toxic relationships. And I couldn't put it down. And I told you, I told Joy backstage, I was reading 2 other books simultaneously. Oh my God. And then hers was always the one. I always felt like I was cheating on the other books with your book because it was so good.
Thank you.
And I have so many questions for you.
Great.
I have so many questions. You're going to love this book.
It.
But I'd love to have you open, Joy, by sharing some of your beautiful words and your beautiful voice, because it's amazing. And this is a gift to me, because I just wanted to hear you read some.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I will do that. Hello. How many people do we have?
It's a lot of light.
Okay. Eventually, I found an attorney who got it, a woman. She filed the relocation request, submitting a comprehensive brief explaining why I needed to leave the state. But she said it usually took a few months for the judge to rule. In the meantime, I'd have to stay in Idaho and deal with the awkwardness of living near my old family. And it wasn't like I could avoid them, having agreed to let Q, my ex, take Rosie a few times a week. On those days, Q and I met at a neutral location, usually a parking lot. He would arrive accompanied by at least 2 other big house family members, typically one of the Barbarians and Gretchen. They would get out of the car and flank Q. They wouldn't speak. They just stood to either side of him and stared at me, stone-faced. What did they think was going to happen? As though all 115 pounds of me were scary enough to warrant 3 adults bullying me, intimidating me in front of our child. The worst part was that these were the people I had called my best friends for 10 years of my life. I trusted them with everything, and now they were treating me like an enemy simply because I didn't want to stay in an abusive marriage or go to church with them anymore. I tried to make sense of it, and the only consistent thing that kept coming back to me was, these people don't like to lose. To them, losing would mean they'd failed God, and he wasn't on their side. And if God wasn't on their side, then their whole belief system would disintegrate, and everything they've been doing for decades would become meaningless. They had to double down again and again until everyone else submitted. This way, they wouldn't ever have to question themselves or doubt their righteousness. Objectively, I understood their dilemma. It was classic narcissism, only in a group format. Even Q's mousy mom, Marty, was roped in. She rang my doorbell one afternoon. When I answered, she said, Q is on his way to pick up Rosie. I'm just going to wait for him here. She started to move past me into the house, and I stopped the door with my foot, blocking her from entering. It was one thing for Q to bring goons to a parking lot, but I was not going to be monitored and bullied in my own home. I'm not comfortable with that, Martine. You're welcome to wait on the porch, and I'll bring Rosie out when Q arrives. Marty moved toward me again and started to push open my front door. This is QB's house too, and he's invited me in. Actually, it's not his house, I corrected her, wedging myself harder into the door gap and pushing back against her. I bought it before we were married. She got close to my face and pressed her body into mine, leading her weight into her right side to try and force it open. His name is on the deed. This is his house too. I had never, in 10 years, seen Marty assert herself. I was almost proud of her. Almost. Martine, you're incorrect, I said. I bought this house on my own, and you're not welcome here. We both weighed about the same, so this was a farce of an arm wrestle, and she started pleading as she pushed now. Don't abandon ship, Joy. We love you. You're always getting in your own way, but we're not going to let you go. We are pulling you onto the ship with us. I quickly brought the arm I had in the doorframe down, swiping in front of my chest and knocking away her wrists from pushing on me. I don't want to be on your fucking ship. She stumbled backward, and after a split-second pause, clumsily slammed herself into my porch railing. You pushed me, she said, eyes wide. I tried to stay measured. You were trying to force your way into my home, I said. You just shoved me into the railing and my wrist is bruised. Do you see this? She held up her wrist, on which I saw nothing. That's assault. I'm going to report this. Her beady eyes bulged with a mixture of rage and fear. More than anything, she looked like an animal in a trap. I slammed my door shut and deadbolted it. Everyone has lost their goddamn mind, I thought. Who the hell are these people? I thought of that photo I'd commissioned that hung in the restaurant. In my mind, the image morphed and fangs began to sprout from everyone's smile. I'd been dining with vampires. No, I realized. I am the dinner.
There's so much there, but so much. I mean, you were gaslighted and narcissistically abused and the whole 9 yards just in that one passage. I paused in that one when I'd read it. So let's go right to the beginning, though. I've been dining with vampires.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Why that? Why is that the title?
It flew out of my pen. I was writing my book proposal. It was as I was trying to describe what it felt like, and the closest tie that I think is commonly thought of with narcissism is vampires, is like a psychic vampire that just sucks the life out of you because they don't have an identity and you do, and they need one. And if you're empathetic enough and an open and a compassionate person and willing to, if you have boundaries, you're willing to move them. If you don't have boundaries, even better for them. And they latch onto you to suck out your identity for themselves because they don't have one. So that was the idea that I was the dinner.
And you were the dinner. And it took you a while.
Yeah.
To
And not
see
just
that.
me. There were a lot of other people involved
Right.
in this group.
Yeah. But I think you were one of the main courses, my dear.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go back. I want to start with that anecdote because I told you even when we talked, like this anecdote hit me hard. Okay, there was an anecdote that jumped out at me towards the end of your book. You were at a party in Los Feliz here in Los Angeles, and you ran into a glamorous friend from back in the day. And she said to you, after sharing an experience she had with a church organization, she said, "Yeah, I'm not stupid enough to fall for this." I loved your response to her. It was so powerful. It was so self-affirming. You were going through so much and you were still able to do this. And I think that people going through emotionally abusive relationships, really any abusive relationships or cult-like experience, we're going to talk about what that means, runs into this kind of gaslighting, invalidating stuff all the time. Can you talk about that experience? I mean, I'm kind of starting at the end, but I think it was such a powerful experience, and I don't want to miss the chance to talk about that.
Yeah, no problem. I did. I ran into an old friend. She was very kind of dismissive about it, like, oh yeah, I kind of visited one of those things once, and I just was like, I'm not stupid enough to fall for something like this. And she said it kind of offhanded, like didn't really realize what she was saying. And so I think because it wasn't directed at me in a antagonistic way, I felt a little bit more space to try and walk her through it. And because I knew her, wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But to be able to walk her through, would you call a woman who is in an abusive relationship stupid? Because, and you know, you'll read it in the book, it's broken down a lot more, but I walk her through this idea of just because a wolf comes into the sheep flock wearing wool, it's not your fault. That's coercion. Right. That's somebody who's deceived you. And why do you think that woman would stay? Why do you think she would stay for so long? Well, I guess she would feel like maybe it's going to get better. And, you know, so I try to walk her through that process. But it is still one of the things that really makes my blood boil when people, because, okay, there's two ways that people love to dismiss these experiences. They love to say either, are you being a little dramatic?
Yep.
Was it really that bad? Like, I think maybe, like, your marriage didn't work out, your church situation didn't work out, you lost some money, but there's real suffering in the world, Joy. Like, I think it's a little much. Or they go, wow, you just believed the random shit some guy told you and it ruined your life? Like, not so bright, are you? And what it puts me in a state of paralysis whenever I run into that, because, like, objectively, I just want to be like, you know what? I don't need to explain myself to anybody. It's fine. Like, I can move on with my day. But even my heart is pounding now thinking about it, because the blind absurdity of the statement, that, like, telling someone that has experienced that kind of mental anguish, the stripping of their confidence, the stripping of their identity, telling that person that they should believe your perspective of them over their experience You are doing the same thing to them that you're telling them nobody's doing to you, while simultaneously asking them, by listening to you, to do the very thing that you just condemned them for doing in the first place. It's a self-defeating argument.
Why do you think people do that? Why do you think people do that? Because that's the core of this, right? This is why people feel so alone, that they go through this. It takes years to even say, okay, and then they go out in the world, and some of their early encounters with the world are all the things you just said.
Yes.
What's the why of that? Because in a way, understanding the why of why the world does this to people can help make them more narcissist resistant, frankly.
That's a great question. I think it's because we like to categorize things. We like black and white. We like to understand what's what. And people don't ever want to think of themselves as vulnerable to being prey to someone manipulative or something that might, like, everybody likes to think of themselves as smart enough to see through scams and schemes, whether it's the car salesman or the, preacher on the corner who's full of shit. Like, I mean, so I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on these things. I'm sorry.
Curse away.
Okay. I think that's it. I think people just we like to categorize things, and we like to feel good about ourselves and what we know. And so the idea that someone might be susceptible to being manipulated, I don't want to think of myself as somebody who could fall for manipulation. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? In your experience, like, you talk to so many people about these things. What do you feel like is the through line?
I think it's an illusion of safety. If this happened because Joy's dumb, then I'm safe because I'm smart.
Right. Except that the thing you're doing to me makes you the one that's
girl,
not very
that's
smart.
what I'm saying. I know that.
Because you don't understand. You're saying something that's self-defeating.
The challenge is, though, if I were to say Joy's dumb and I'm smart, guess who's the next person who's going to get into a cult?
Right. If
I think I'm that clever, and let's face it, cults can have two people in them, and it's called a relationship. Yes. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's all the same tools. So let's talk about this word. It's a heavy word, cult. Yeah. Joy, and I'm so glad you used it, and I thought one of the real courages of your book was to use that because it fit 100%. But it's a tricky word. So can you talk a little bit about cults and just what you learned about cults doing this? Because I think that, again, I thought it was courageous you were willing to use the right word to describe this.
It was hard. It's always been a little hard to use that word. I think I mean, the first time I really heard it in an application to my situation, I was in a therapist's office, and she said, "Are we ready to use the word cult yet?" And I was very upset with her. Yeah. How dare you? I am not that stupid. And, because I believed it too. I had the same stereotype. And then the more I thought about it, the more I researched, the more I realized, like, oh, that's what this was. And really, cult is just a slang. It's an old, like, pagan word from a long time ago, cultists, which is the people who used to cultivate worshipping the idols at the temple and stuff like that. So it's just a word that, because these are small sects, it's used to quantify extreme, like what we think of as extreme. But there's no gauge. Like, what's the gauge for extreme? Like normal, bing, extreme. I don't know that exists. So it's just it's a word that you can't use it in court. You have to say high demand group. But then there's so many things that qualify as a high demand group. It's a really hard thing to qualify. And again, I think our brains are just wired to compartmentalize things. We like to create solid things that I know this is the ground, I know this is where I stand with you, I know this is where I stand with my kids. There's a solidness to that, and it feels scary when things are unknown. So it's hard to use the word cult because it has so many connotations, like Children of God and Jim Jones and Manson and all these things. And know that my situation wasn't that type of extreme. And so how do I mean, Well, we weren't, mentally, we were going through the same experience.
Yeah.
The way it manifested physically wasn't. And so, like, because culturally there's like more an acceptable version, like going to church and having it be a small group feels more culturally acceptable than living in the woods and wearing robes and drinking things. But it's all the same.
Right.
It's the same, you're going through the same thing. It's the same rewiring your neural pathways to believe something because you want to believe it. So, and all of those groups probably started out as something much like mine was and just kept going and got more extreme. I hope that made sense.
It makes absolute sense. So was the aha moment in the therapist office?
That was the moment in the therapist's office, yeah.
Wow.
She said it, I fought back with her, and eventually lost the argument. And then realized I had to accept it, and it was scary. It's scary to start talking about it. I think what made it easier was trying to get ahead of it, like, okay, well, if this is what happened to me, I have to learn how to forgive myself. I have to learn how to trust myself again. And I gotta be willing to laugh at my mistakes. I can't live in shame about this because it'll eat me alive. It's so big, it'll eat me alive.
Okay, so Joy, I'm going to push you for a minute. What did you do wrong? I have to forgive myself.
Yeah.
Forgiving oneself means you did something wrong. Exactly what is it you did wrong?
It's a twofold answer. One is, I did nothing wrong. It's just what shame does to you. When you get into a coercive situation, you feel, I should have known better. Somehow I should have known better. I don't know how I would have. I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
I was totally taken advantage of. And again, it's the wolf in sheep's clothing. You don't expect that. So I want to be a person who moves about in the world with an open heart and trusting. And it's very sad and enraging and all of the things that someone came in and took advantage of that. But the shame kept me feeling locked down, like I had done something wrong. So then I started to use cult as a sense of like, I was in a cult for 10 years as like a joke, just to try and get it out of my body, and then began to start healing. But the other thing that I would say is I have to take ownership for my part of being willing to maintain. I wanted family so bad. I wanted to be a part of a family so badly.
Yep.
And I had this idealized version of what a family would look like. I had two great parents. I was an only child. We moved around a lot, and my parents were great. But there was just this gap that I just wanted to know what it felt like to be a part of a real, big, loud, bustling community family. And I wanted that more than I wanted to see the truth. That was my codependence. That was my selfish desire to intentionally like block out anything when people were warning me, and no, the stakes were too high. I built too much of my identity around this. I'm not willing to look at it.
Okay, so I want to take a turn here. Okay,
Please,
not meaning to put
Joy
doing therapy with Joy on a stage in front of hundreds of people, but let's go.
Let's do it.
Use even how you use your
this is what I've been telling myself this whole time. If you got better information for me, give it to me.
I ain't got much, but I got better. Okay. So even the way you use your hands, I blocked, right? You didn't want to see it, and you didn't want to see this because you wanted to remain attached to this family system. And attachment is always going to win because it's one of the most inherent human needs we have, is to attach and connect. This is even beyond what a child needs. As adults, we need that. We can tell ourselves, I can swipe my way through my life. We need people.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, and you wanted to be part of this.
Yeah.
So these things you weren't seeing, this group, this capital F family, was betraying you. They were betraying you all the time, from the beginning. But if you saw that betrayal, Joy, then you couldn't be part of it. And that attaching part of you, almost, I don't want to say dissociate, detached, like it it sort of knowingly unknowed those things, because to see those things meant no more attachment, no more belonging. And I even, again, I took umbrage at it before we were talking before, and I'm going to say it again. Yeah. I don't think you're codependent. I think that wanting attachment is a human need or want, and not seeing the things that will interfere with attachment are how we get stuck in harmful relationships, harmful systems, why we stay stuck in relationships that invalidate us for decades. You just wanted to love and be loved. There's nothing pathologic about that. And that's how people end up in cults.
How do you define codependent?
I feel that if I don't love the term anymore. This is from the 1950s. Okay, we've learned a lot about addiction. It's an addiction. It's a term that came from the world of addiction. Right?
Which we had in my family line a lot of. So
you did.
I think I just attached to that word.
Because but I think that the problem with the codependent definition is it makes you almost complicit in the dynamic. The idea of like the codependent is a person who keeps booze in the house. The codependent who's the one who always looks the other way and almost supports that behavior. And the codependent is the person who needs the drunk to stay a drunk so the relationship can keep going. You don't want there to be growth. And I think when we call people codependents, we assume a complicity, and then the codependent person feels like they're stuck in the mud too. I think codependent, I think a lot of people who call themselves codependent are just people who are attaching to a loving space with someone and trying to detangle from a history and the things you want. That's not easy. And I think that, and because so many codependents were women, it was a way to pathologize gender, which is a whole nother conversation we can have another time. Take two. But you see what I'm saying about the cultic piece was, it was attachment for you with family, and you were young, and you were also in an industry that expects you to at 20 to have the sophistication of a 50-year-old, but the look of a teenager. I think that's an impossible ask. It's set up a vulnerability.
I buy that. That feels...
So if we free Joy from being a codependent tonight, okay?
Thank you.
So because I don't think it's
really
true.
Good. I really want to. I want to live with that, because that's that was my way of making sense out of it, and also feeling like I want to be humble. I want to be like acknowledge if I have. That was one of the first parts of moving past shame for me, was like, if there's any part of me that led myself into this or was open to this because of a blind spot or something, like I want to see it. I don't want to live in a space of just being bitter and angry that this happened. And so I think I just, like, I had read that book, Codependent No More, and there were so many things that made sense to it in me. I was like, I guess that's what's going on. Wow.
We've come a long way in how we think about that. And I think that what does happen is that when you feel like you're part of the problem, it's a lot harder to get unstuck.
Yeah. And that's where the shame comes in.
And that's where the shame comes in, right? So
Thank
you. It's my pleasure. But I want to lift that sense of complicity. You were taken advantage of, and you were betrayed by people you trusted. And it was a gradual process. That's something I'd love for you to talk about, is that nobody goes around to the school fair that is life and says, oh, cult, sign me up. Nobody voluntarily enters a cult, right?
Yeah.
This is not a quest for someone, right? So that's not what you were signing up for. This was gradual. Can you talk about that gradualness?
Yes, it was something that was very familiar to me at first, walking into a home church environment. I grew up in a modern Protestant, non-denominational environment, visiting different churches all the time. And a very common activity was like a Wednesday night Bible study. And so it's usually in someone's home. It's with a smaller group from the church of people who live in your neighborhood, so that it's easier to live in community with people who share your faith, who share your values. In a healthy world, that doesn't prohibit you from having plenty of other relationships with all different people of all different walks of life, and learning from them and growing in that. But in this case, what began as that very benign Wednesday night Bible study, which was on a Saturday night in this case, turned within about a year into something a lot more controlling, a lot darker, because we had a pastor from another state come visit because he knew somebody that was involved in the group. And I think he just got real excited to see a lot of young entertainment industry professionals, mostly girls, and a lot of girls that had gaps in their upbringing with their dad.
Yep.
My dad was, again, wonderful, super present. Our relationship was heavily cerebral, and I didn't get a lot of his heart and emotion. And so we had a great relationship, but I was longing for that fatherly male, like comfort, love, and Les, the pastor from another state, came in and offered that. It was very self-deprecating and funny and charming, and just was so comforting. It was a really comforting presence that I was longing for. And it took him about a year, and it was a slow process. He started by presenting little. What was the first one? The first one was the idea that you. Okay, so this is in the Bible. I know he brought it out from a verse that was in the Bible, and I wrote about it in the book, but I don't have all my research with me right now. But it was the thing about, like, speak truth. Like, basically, you say the positive thing to the person. That's if you're complaining all the time, instead of me as your friend telling you, hey, you know what, I love you, but like you complain so much that it's making me not want to hang out with you. Could you stop? Or how can I help you? What can we do together? Instead of saying that, you say, I love hanging out with you. You are such a positive person. You are so grateful, and I just really appreciate the way you see the best in everything all the time. And so you tell yourself this lie about the person, and you tell the person this lie about themselves, trying to subconsciously, passive-aggressively get them to become the person that you want them to be. But it's couched in a way, or for us at that time, it was couched in a way that felt so loving. It felt so like, oh my gosh, that is such a what a lovely way to go about life. Now I don't have to point my finger at someone and talk about the fact that they complain all the time. Now I can just say, I know what to do. I'm just going to encourage you. I'm going to encourage you until you believe the truth about yourself. And it sounds great. And we all bought it. And then he's like, you watch, and it's like, okay, they bought that, what's next? And then there's the next thing, and then there's the isolation from your family, and and it's a slow burn, but it's a long con. Like, these guys are so patient.
It's a long con, and even some of the things like referring to your family of origin as your bio family. One thing that Les did a lot and I was almost about to start counting it because he'd call you baby. Over and over he'd call you baby, and it was as though he was, through language, infantilizing you, making you smaller and smaller and more controllable. Because it's, you know what I'm saying?
I didn't even know that when I was writing it. Because he did that. It was just his language. Hey, baby. Oh, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
It's
but
like,
we were so seen as children.
Yep.
And sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
That was
your book.
No, but I had a phone call with the Emily character in this book. She was so helpful to me in putting this together and filling in all the gaps in my memory. And she said she remembered, this isn't in the book because we didn't have time to put everything in there, but she said she remembers having this dinner with a bunch of people in the group, and she was sitting across from the Les and Pam characters. And they were talking about all of us, the younger people in the group who were in our late 20s by then, about us all being kids, and the kids this and the kids that. And she said, guys, when do we stop being kids? Because we were kids when we started, but she's like, I'm married, I've got 2 kids of my own now. So can we stop with the talking to me like I'm a child? Like, I can decide what car I want to buy without having to ask my spiritual parents. And the response that she got was, you'll always be children.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So You're right. I didn't even realize that subconscious thing he was doing. Baby, baby, baby.
Yep.
Ugh.
Yeah, I know. So because I do not want to forget to talk about this part, which was, I told you that the part of the book that hit me the most viscerally, I started to cry when I read this part of the book. When one of your dreams was to play Belle in Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
And you were going to
Got the
audition
part.
for the part. You got the part
Got the part.
on Broadway.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened. I mean, I think I'm going to burst into tears again. I actually had to put the book down for a couple of days. It was that upsetting to me. I mean, you really did such a beautiful job of bringing the joy in the story to life. Like, this is my friend, and I'm like, no, honey, no, please. So can you talk about that part of it? Because it was powerful.
Yeah. I write a lot in the book about musical theater. I was a musical theater kid, and my grandma was in musical theater. My grandpa was on Broadway. Long lineage in my family. I love my time on the boards, and I had auditioned for Belle multiple times when I was living in New York, and I had always kind of gotten close, and they were at this stage in the show where they were bringing in like Toni Braxton and Debbie Gibson and these big names, and so I never got the part. And then when I was on One Tree Hill, it was the perfect combo. They were finally like, yay, we've always loved you, but now we really can like bank on you. And the show was super popular at the time, One Tree Hill. And so I auditioned, and then I went back and I did a work session, and then I went back and I met with the producers, and then I had one more final session. And it was really rigorous, and I worked for months on this. And I got the part. I got the call. My manager said, you got it. It was so exciting. And we celebrated in Wilmington, and we celebrated with my friends and family. And then I called Les to tell him. And he said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy for you. I do have to tell you, I feel like this might be an attack from the enemy. The enemy in the book, it's like Christianese for Satan. And this might be an attack. And the thing is, Joy, God's always going to just give you. Like, you're so talented. Like, you can't outgive God. You can't if you give this back to him and turn it down, he'll bring even more. It's the televangelists on the TV, like, give me everything that's in your bank account, and God will replenish it tomorrow, whatever. And the argument that he used, or the rationale that he used, was, you are at the cusp of discovering what it's like to have a real family, what you've always wanted. You've got all of us here waiting for you with open arms. And we just want to love on you and let you experience this longing of your heart that you've had your whole life. And yeah, you've longed about being on Broadway your whole life, but Broadway will always be there. Turn this down. Spend your summer up here. Experience what it's like to be a part of a real family. And then God will bring something else in your path, and you'll be better prepared, because being a part of a real family builds character, and you're going to need that kind of character when you go out and have a big career. And I turned it down. Stuff.
How did you grieve that?
I ignored it for a week or two. I just shut down. I just didn't talk about it. I went cold. I had work to do. I had to show up on set. I had to do my job. I talked myself into that this was the right thing to do. Absolutely, this is good. I'm a martyr. I'm making a great sacrifice for God. God's going to honor my sacrifice. And then I screamed and cried at the top of my lungs in a car after my friend's wedding, and I accidentally called her on the phone while I was doing it. And she, also not in the book, you guys, she picked up the phone, and then she called me back a couple times afterward, and, are you okay? What's going on? And she thought I was upset that she had got married and I wasn't married. And yeah, it wasn't that. I really let it out. Big, heavy, heaving sobs just for probably an hour, screamed at the top of my lungs. And then it was too late. Like, there was no way to turn it around at that point. They had moved on. So I just had to talk myself back into it.
But when you in the book, you make this very clear. What was so grotesque about it all was that this was heartbreaking for you, and he tried to sell it as this. And again, please let everyone know where the family, capital F, lived. It wasn't like it was I don't know. It's a culty vibe
Totally,
where you all were.
Pacific Northwest. It's very, everything's shrouded in those big heavy trees, and it's very strip mall area. Like, there's nothing special about the town or the area. It's just
So that's where
nowhere.
He wanted you to spend the summer in the middle of nowhere, instead of on Broadway. But it was even worse than that. It wasn't as simple as do this and you will receive more. It was you would make more doing X, Y, or Z versus being distracted by being on Broadway. There was even a financial kind of manipulation there too.
For sure. Because and I think also he knew if I went back to New York, I was a New Yorker in my blood.
Yeah.
Like, he knew if I went back to New York, I would have stayed. I would have moved on. I would have done a different show.
Yeah.
I would have been surrounded by the thing that I love the most. Like, I really enjoy TV. Film is fun. It's a really cool experience, and I am satisfied creatively in many ways. But there is nothing like getting on a stage and singing and dancing and using my entire body and my soul and my voice and it's all happening at the same time. Like, I am alive when I'm playing a character on a stage. And he knew that if I got into that environment, there was no way I was ever going to come back.
That's right. And you were an asset in many ways to that whole operation that they were running.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your body, because you're talking about, I'm on the stage, I feel it on my body.
Yeah.
You were, when we're being abused in a relationship, when we think of abuse, it's somebody physically abusing someone, but what was happening, those accumulated betrayals, that's trauma too. Yeah. And that's all held in an embodied way. How were you feeling all of this in your body? And were you feeling some of this stuff in your body and not having the words to connect with what was happening? Like, in essence, did your body sense what was happening before your mind got it?
Yes, I did. I always felt like something, not always, when things really started to turn, when the love bombing stopped and it now turned into the devaluation segment of the programming, I felt something was very wrong, but I thought it was me because I had put so much trust and faith in this man and these people and this woman who was sort of the mother figure of the group. Like, I really trusted them because I thought, like, I can't be trusted to make my own decisions. Like, I'm just a kid. Like, you tell me how to live my life. Yeah. So I felt it. I just thought it was me.
It's not you.
It turns out it was not me. But it took me years. I didn't realize it till I became a mother. And then everything shifted.
Yeah.
They're not with me for the 2 a.m. feedings, and they just aren't there at every moment. I really could not abdicate my agency to anyone else as a mom. I had to go with my gut intuition, what she needed at what time and what she's feeling and why she's doing, all those things. And I think reinvigorating that inside of me made me go, maybe my gut's not totally off about everything all the time. So maybe it's not all me.
Well, that's progress, right? And your gut is almost always right, especially when it comes to these, the relational stuff. That's again, that confusion between, like I said, wanting attachment, wanting to belong, wanting to trust, human need. Yeah. And when that's not happening, there's even a name for that. Dr. Jennifer Fried calls it betrayal blindness. We push betrayals, the everyday betrayals that happen out of our mind, so we can stay in relationship.
Yeah.
If we start noticing this stuff, we're like, "Ooh, this isn't entirely cool." That's what I'm saying. A cult can be two people.
Right.
You know,
right.
a narcissistically abusive person and the other person in the relationship, but it's very asymmetric. But this was just more people. It wasn't that many. It wasn't that big a cult.
Not that many. No. We
Yeah.
had about 28, I think,
Yeah.
on our biggest
Right.
day.
But most cults are small. I think people forget there are thousands and thousands of cults
Yes,
out there.
I know.
Thousands.
Isn't that wild?
And most of them are small. And there's the ones the flashy ones that get the news attention, or again, that people are wearing the same clothes, and also it feels strange. But
it's not all. I have a friend who was in one that was an acting class.
Yep.
And
Yes. There are these personal development, self-development.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
you'd be struck at how many places that cultic systems are hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily want to get bigger either, I think, because it's the control that they can manage.
Exactly right. So now, what I hear though is you got very good at storytelling. The only way this was going to work is if for any of us, not just you were in a cult, other people are in the relationships they're in. Some people in this room are from family systems that feel and operate and almost run like cults, right?
Yes, definitely.
We have to tell ourselves stories to make unhealthy relationships last.
Yeah.
And I would say anyone who's been through a cultic system is a master storyteller. So can you talk a bit about the storytelling you had to engage in to stay and to make sense of it, because your body was starting to feel it?
Yeah. The stories that I had to tell myself, I mean, I'm trying to think of anything in particular that I mean, it comes up probably because I'm an actor. I was just good at improv. So like I'd be in a moment and something would come at me that felt bad in my body, but I'd override it with anything from he's having a bad day, or they didn't grow up the way that I grew up, or I mean, honestly, it's all the things that we do when we catch ourselves being judgmental and you don't want to be, and you try and like create a space of empathy for someone, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to judge that. Like, I shouldn't be so quick to judge. I do that when I'm in traffic and I'm pissed off at the guy that cut me off, and then my daughter's like, maybe he has a casserole in the car, and I'm like, maybe he has a casserole in the car. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of casseroles and a lot of cars in this city. I'm telling you that right now.
But it's all that stuff that you think is fine and normal to do because you're creating space and you're clearing your mind out from being judgmental, and you're becoming a more whole, open person. And the problem is, if you do it when you're up against your gut, you're like then you just keep denying yourself over and over. And that's what I did anyway. I just kept denying myself over and over and over again, in favor of the story that needed to be told to keep the construct of my identity alive.
Right. All the while, your identity was kind of being stolen. That's
sure.
what the irony was.
Yes.
Right? So the identity that was growing up in the face of this was actually now a constructed identity rather than the real one that wasn't allowed.
Right. It's a constructed identity based on needing approval from other people.
Right.
And
but specific other people.
Specific other people, yes. Only the people that I had deemed worthy of giving me an identity.
Okay, I'm going to pull you back from that.
Okay.
They're the people who deemed themselves worthy. I don't know that you deemed them worthy. When you keep hearing the message, we are the elders, we are the only ones who, anything else, and you are, it's hubris in the face of God. They cannibalize your faith.
Right, yes.
They weaponize your faith against you.
Yeah.
That's a powerful tool, Joy.
It is. It's what else do we have if everything else goes away? We have our faith.
Right, and your faith was important to you.
Yeah.
So anytime Joy tried to be joy, that my read on the book was, if Joy tried to be joy, then it was hubris. You were getting in the face of God. You were getting in the face of your faith. Who's going to develop an
100%.
identity under those conditions?
Not me.
Not most
certainly
people,
didn't.
right? And I think that's the piece that every time you would try to become your real joy, right? And whether it was the part in the play, whether it was other choices you wanted to make, it was always they were calling it ego. They were calling it hubris. Or they'd play the game with you of God will give. Just wait. It was future faking.
All the time. Yes. Just hold on. Just one more. Just one more bet. It's every gambler in a casino that is like, just I got to double down one more time.
It's gaslighting. It's moving the goalposts. And it's not okay.
Yeah.
And most cultic systems do that. Hold on longer, a little bit longer. The big thing is coming.
Yeah.
Whatever that big thing is.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's a delusional big thing, but sometimes it's just the ordinary you're going to get back.
Even
and that's
abusive
it.
relationships,
All
the
the
partner will
time.
say,
I'm going to change.
I'm going to change. I'm never going to do that again.
I'm going to go to therapy.
Yeah.
I'll be better. Give it 6 months. In a year, we're going to move. In 2 years, this is going to happen. We're going to have a kid in 2.
It's been my job. My job's been exhausting.
My
me.
job,
Yeah.
And people believe it because they want to remain attached. There is real love. And I would say that there was real love for you and the family, that there was something very real. I never doubted that piece as I read your book. You really communicated that with such compassion. And even that sense of you can't be judgmental. I'm like, why not? You can be judgmental and empathic at the same time. Or maybe that's a rationalization.
Say more things like that. Help me understand.
you casserole MF and you can't drive and good luck with the casserole. But I think that judgment, what you're calling judgment, is something that's very visceral.
Well, I guess there's a difference between
feel it.
judgment and discernment, though, isn't there?
Ooh, discernment's everything.
Okay,
Discernment's the money shot. Okay? And that's what my hope is, and I hear that, especially at the end of the book, you got after this experience, is that hypervigilance is that on edge, walking on eggshells that I bet you must have felt as you got out of this, right?
All the time.
That's not discernment. That's hypervigilance. That's this.
Yeah.
Discernment is feeling like you're back in your body and you can pay attention to a situation and say, I don't like this.
Yeah, something feels bad.
I'm pulling back.
Okay.
And I'm trusting me because I'm all I have.
So then what's judgment?
I felt you were talking about moralistic judgment.
Oh. No. Was I? Maybe I was.
I don't want to judge them.
Giving? Oh, yeah, I don't want to judge them for being... Well, I don't know. What would you call that? If I walked into a filthy house...
I'm judging them already. And my house is a mess.
No, I immediately judged. I was like, this is disgusting. And then I felt bad because I was like, well, they've got 3 boys. I wasn't raised with boys. Maybe this is how boys live. And like, nobody's ever taught me. What do I know? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, don't be judgmental. So was I trying to be moralist? Like, was that a moralistic
So I'm thinking it's
judgment,
empathy and judgment. So it's like, this house is gross.
Yeah.
Okay. They do... Okay, I can be open to the possibility that people with 3 sons can have a filthy house. Had you been to the house before it became filthy? Because you knew the previous owners. I mean, you knew the owners of the house who were living... who were made to live in the garage or something?
Yes.
The people who own the house had to move to the garage, folks.
Guys. Yes. The doctor and his wife who... met the pastor in the first place, and the wife was the woman who became the mom of the group and whatever. They had this gorgeous house, and they moved into the garage to give this pastor a pastoral home, because it's like a lot of churches will, if you ship in a pastor from another state,
Sure.
you're like, here's your home for the congregation or whatever for the time that you're with the congregation. So they did that, but there was no congregation, like there was no church.
And they trashed the house.
And trashed the house. I mean, there was...
That you said that people had a lot of pride and ownership of their home and very tidy. You really made that point, like when you all were getting together in Los
pristine in the
Angeles, even then
photos.
they were very careful even in the the space they were staying in
Oh,
Los
yeah.
Angeles. So that part also hit me as a complete and utter disrespect.
Yeah.
And so my point is the judgment, Joy,
Yeah.
was you actually reacting to something that was in a larger context deeply uncomfortable. This
The
wasn't
disrespect.
just somebody who hadn't vacuumed.
No.
They had ruined someone else's home. Please don't come to my house, though, because I was feeling you might judge. So I was like, my house is a mess.
No.
There's a call.
Mine
No,
is-
no.
mine
And I
is
don't
too.
live in the
No,
garage.
but there's a difference between mess and filth. Like I say in the book, we weren't in Grey Gardens territory, but like it
Close.
was getting there.
Yeah.
Nobody was eating cat food out of cans, but we were definitely.
You've got a low bar.
Oh God, I'm still working on it. Still working on it all. No, it was it was just that they ran up and down the carpet and they muddied the carpet and the walls were ripped up from the boys running around and like there's just it's the disrespect of someone else's
Right.
home. Yes, and it's another part of the long con is
Yep.
come on in. Isn't it so fun to be in a house that's just so busy and full of activity that we
Yeah.
don't even have time to clean. We're just like loving each other and everybody's racing around and you're like, I guess family homes that I went into when I was a kid, they had a lot of kids, was always a little bit messy. Okay. And that's the beginning of the storytelling and you just start.
That's it. Right. So some of those so-called judgments, can we think of them as awarenesses?
Yes. Oh, I like that. Yeah.
That there's something not quite right here. And that not quite rightness, the discernment, is that it's almost like it's a palpable step back.
Yeah.
I don't like this. You're 20. The self-compassion is you were 20.
Yeah.
And 20 is a kid.
Such a kid.
And a kid who wanted a place to belong.
Yeah. Yeah, and how else are you supposed to know? I mean, you prevent things like this from happening to you by them happening to you in one way or another. You get involved in the wrong relationship, you get involved in a group, you get involved in a church that's bad or an acting class that goes bad or, a work dynamic that is toxic and you learn from it and then you get older and in retrospect we can see it, but yeah, 20?
It's a kid.
It's a baby.
Do you think actors are more vulnerable to getting into cults?
I hesitate to make a blanket statement about that, but I do think they are certainly very susceptible because of the nature of our whole job is empathy and manipulating your emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my job, is to show up on set and convince my body that I'm experiencing something that's not real. I'm not crying in a scene because I'm thinking about my dog that died when I was 9. I'm crying because the actor across from me is convincing me that they're in pain and or whatever, you know what I'm saying. So I think in that regard, it probably is easier for actors or for artists and people who are empaths who really are the people who spend a lot of time thinking about life and seeking answers to the big questions in life. Artists have historically been known as those kinds of people. They are constantly harvesting and curious and asking questions and how can I take what I've learned and then create something to maybe offer an answer or offer more questions to the world in a different way. And there's always that deep processing. So when somebody has answers for you that seem to make sense and you care so much, that's a powerful combo, I would say.
Yeah, it is a very powerful combo. And I think one thing that strikes me, and having had the opportunity to talk with other, actors and artists, is that you have a unique capacity. Like if you were asked to play a villain, you'd actually have to infuse some humanity into that villain, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually think that I've seen this. Many performers, actors are often quite empathic with narcissistic people.
Yes.
And I think it's often because they had to fill them once they had to fill them with the humanity. And so they're really good at finding that.
Yeah,
and
that's
then,
so interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the places where I think there could be a vulnerability, someone being drawn into that kind of a manipulative, controlling system.
Wow, that's so true. Because your villain won't be believable if
No.
it's just a mustache twisting. Like, it has to be
Yes.
somebody that you... And I've been talking about this recently. My boyfriend and I have been watching a lot, catching up on a lot of old movies, and he's not a movie buff. He doesn't really know a lot about movies. And there's this thing that is in basically every movie where there's a protagonist and an antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And the line is some version of, we're the same, you and I. Mm-hmm. We're not so different from each other.
That's right.
And you'll start to see it in almost every movie, whether it's Rush Hour, like action movie, or Braveheart, whatever. This line exists. There's a moment. And I think we're used to that. We're, especially as actors, not just experiencing that moment, but spending time looking at the yin and yang of things. So yeah, you do want to be empathetic, and you're curious too.
Yep.
Tell me more about you. Tell me more about why you think that. How does that work? I guess I could see that. I could imagine myself thinking that.
So that does foster a vulnerability in the sense of you may cut people more slack and create more rationalizations. So how did you do it? You're going to One Tree Hill, right? This thing that had gotten ahead of steam had become a cultural moment. Yeah. You're having to do these powerful scenes, and at the same time, you're involved in this family, and it was getting more and more troublesome. Yeah. How did you balance that? Because this isn't as simple as a person being in a dysfunctional relationship and still having to show up on set. This was a lot more confusing. How did you dichotomize that and live? It was beyond me how you were able to keep performing under the conditions you were in.
I think necessity is the mother of invention, and I just figured it out. I've always been... I joke in the book when I meet a friend of mine who's like so gorgeous, and I was like, I felt like a raccoon, like cleaning dumpster lettuce out of my paws, like when I met her. And I've always kind of felt that way, like a scrappy kid. I was always just fighting my way through, and so I like a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think there was probably some kind of subconscious dopamine hit I was getting from being able to manage so much and handle so much. I also was so exhausted that and you'll see it later in the seasons of One Tree Hill. I'm not up to par in many scenes. There's a lot of days when I have watched it back on the podcast that I do, and I'm like, man, I remember what was going on at that time. I know I didn't show up to work that day. I was just phoning it in. I was exhausted. But I think that was part of this sort of superiority complex that comes with being in a cult like this. The leader's a narcissist. He's creating little narcissists within the group because it's all self-focused, and it's all how do I make myself, how do I fix myself, how do I focus on me, and the sense of superiority that I'm a martyr, I'm doing all of these, I'm managing to be on a TV show and have this great family experience and feel like I'm being persecuted by the people that I work with and my real family and all of these things, and I'm still managing to have friendships and fight spiritual battles with the family that I was like, the superiority complex was through the roof for me.
You think it was superiority?
Well, I did until now. What do you think it was?
By calling it superiority, it feels as though you're calling yourself grandiose. And it felt like you were trying simply to survive.
Yeah.
And survive. Like I just felt like you got that messaging.
Yeah.
And it's still in you.
I mean, that's totally possible. Like, superiority complex to me is when I feel like I'm just better than other people because I've got something that they don't have. I've figured out the answer that you don't have. And so I'm using my, it could happen in any environment. Somebody who spends all their life volunteering, and in some ways kind of feels like, well, I know a lot of people who don't spend their life volunteering. At least I'm doing my part in doing that, so I'm a little bit better than. Like, I think we all have these little moments of superiority. So I guess that to me, it's like that's what I was leaning on, was I was getting a hit off of that, off of feeling like I'm a little better.
I feel, but it's like you're getting hit from getting through the day.
Getting hit from getting through.
All you were doing was getting through the day. You were actually
yeah.
getting up, going to set, showing up in your role, despite all the madness that was going on behind you.
Yeah.
You actually, in fact, one part of the book that hit me so strong is you had this, it sounds like this really cute little house in Wilmington with the colorful sofa, and it was, like you just sort of found an old place and made it your own, and even that got taken from you, right?
Yeah.
And you were told, no, we have to live in some cookie cutter, bland, icky place, and so all these things were happening to you, and you were still getting up and doing it, and so that doesn't feel like superiority. That feels like survival. That feels like pride in like, well, I haven't folded.
Yeah, I can carry so much. I didn't fold.
And I don't even think you thought you were carrying so much. I think you're like, I got through the day.
Yeah,
I did what I was asked to do.
I did.
And that sense of superiority, such a common thing we see in survivors of narcissistic relationships of any kind. They're like, I think, well, maybe I'm being ridiculous and kind of grandiose by saying, like, I did a good thing. I'm like, but you did a good thing. Like, they're not walking around saying, I'm the greatest ever. No one is greater than me. You're not saying that. It's very much, I did this incredible thing. You did this incredible thing. That's reality. That's ego strength. That's not selfishness. And I think that's interesting. You're still calling it superiority. This is, I always say, like the sort of the emotional dialysis of getting rid of this toxicity from our lives. It takes a minute.
What do you? That's so good. So good. What do you call it when I'm feeling? Condescending. Like, I'm looking at other people in my life at this time and thinking, I feel so bad for you because you don't, like, I've got the answers. Falling apart, but I've got the answers. And it's this sense of like, you have no idea what I'm going through, and you couldn't handle this, and like, is that not feeling superior?
So you genuinely felt like you don't. I get it. You don't.
At that time, yes, that was a big part of it for me. Was believing that but it didn't come out from a sense of. I'm looking back at it now, narrating it that way. At the time, of course, it was like I thought I was being compassionate and empathetic, and just like it was condescending. It was. Man, I just really wish other people could see like how great this is, and how I wish they could understand. And it's so sad that they can't, that they're just not spiritually mature enough to understand.
And believing you're spiritually mature allowed you to do what? It allowed you to, something very important.
Stay attached.
Bingo. So as long as you held on to that, and allowed you to stay, that identity, that belief allowed you to stay attached to the distorted narrative of the family. Don't feel that way, and now all of a sudden that cuts that tie. This was all survival.
That's really good, thank you. It's cool, it's cool. Thanks. Yeah. I'm gonna process that later in my hotel room. Yeah.
But these kindnesses that get lost, it's very hard. I mean, it's still, that's why healing is such a protracted process.
Wow.
It takes time. We don't just come out of it and like people say, I'm out of the relationship, I should be better.
Yeah.
And I'll say there's half-lives to this, and it takes a while to run through us.
The storytelling, like there's still things I'm telling myself stories about to make it make sense.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Thank you for that.
No, of course, but it doesn't make sense is the problem, because when somebody intentionally sets out to use other people as pawns in their games
Yeah.
and turns them into objects, from what we know about love, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that's the harm of people who are willing to engage in this kind of manipulation and control of other
Yeah.
people. Like you said, the vampire, right? The
Yes.
vampire sucks the life out of the other to supply themselves. And that's what this is. You even said that you felt very numb. It's another theme I picked out in the book. You were
Yeah.
numb a lot. So either you were feeling this sense of, I'm spiritually evolved, like I'm not like them.
Yeah.
But you were also really numb. Can you talk about that sense? Because I think it was so important. In some ways it was keeping you strangely alive, but it was also pulling you away. How did that play out for you, that numbness?
Well, the numbness came mostly after I was married and
Yeah.
really felt stuck. Like I didn't feel actually stuck until I was in a marriage that was clearly wrong. And feeling the weight of being under a microscope of every single thing that I did, thought, every mood swing, every moment was watched and calendared, and like I couldn't move. I had to ask permission for everything. There's a scene in the book about trying to get dressed, and like it took 2 hours standing in the closet because I kept being told over and over, like, you can't wear, those are soft pants, sweatpants are soft pants. Well, jeans hug your ass, and a skirt's easy access. And I'm like, what am I supposed to wear? And
Numbness.
Thank you.
It's interesting on the numbness question, you got numb. Funny how that works.
My body just shut down, like, I don't want to live that memory again. God, that's wild. In real time. Yeah, and so as a survival mechanism, just began to go numb. Like I didn't want to argue anymore. I turned over my money to my ex to be in charge of, because I couldn't, like, I was making so much money on this show. And I remember coming home with a bag full of clothes from J. Crew, and the receipt was like $385. And it was one of the biggest fights we ever had. And that kind of stuff was like, when it's every day and you can't move, and everything every day, all day long, is being commented on and judged and pointed out. I was like, okay, like I'll just, fine, you take care of the money. I don't want to fight about it anymore. Whatever I can do to keep the peace. Because I could function traveling back and forth, working on a show, being in with this family. I still had my independence. I couldn't function, and I certainly couldn't do my job in an emotional state of despair, which I had entered into.
Yeah.
And the only way to survive the despair was go numb.
Yeah.
That's all.
And I mean, that numbness, again, a form of dissociation. It's just
Yeah.
in a sort of, and it's part of that sort of trauma responsive submission. You know, that you've given in because fighting has not, because you did fight for a while.
I fought for so long.
And then when the fighting doesn't work, the trauma systems, the sympathetic nervous system, shuts down.
Find peace, just find peace.
Or find safety.
Wherever it looks, yes.
Find safety.
Yeah, because it certainly wasn't actual peace, but it did feel like numbness felt like peace in some way.
Absolutely. And I think and unfortunately it's not, because now, in essence, at that point in the book, joy was almost all gone.
Yeah.
So what you've done is remarkable, how much you've come back into yourself. That is a steep, steep mountain to climb.
Thanks.
And it'll be a lifelong journey every day,
Yeah.
ensuring that all of joy is joy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's a big one. So, listen, fans of your show are going to read this book, right? I personally think anyone who cares about toxic relationships should read this book, and that's how I'm putting it out to people who, I work with and talk to. What do you want people to take away from your book?
I'd like for them to take away the warning signs, to be able to understand how also understand how coercion works.
Yes.
How slowly these things happen. To demystify this idea of cult and really think about it as what it is narcissistic abuse, whether it's in an individual or a group format. To be able to identify it gives you empathy. If you know someone who's coming out of that, hopefully my book will help you have empathy and have wisdom and tools for how to communicate with them, know what they've been through, not label them as something strange or put them into a category that's something could never happen to you, because it could. And at the end of it, I really want people to feel hope and like they're not alone. And I worked really hard on doing that in the book, because I mean, it's why the cover looks like a soapy, campy, because I wanted people to know that this is not a drag. Like, there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of like self-deprecation, there's like silly moments and things. I wanted you to feel this sense of it's all okay. It's all okay in the end. And there's no shame. And you're not alone. You're definitely not alone. That was a really long-winded answer.
It's a good one.
But those are my points.
I think that, and you did all of that in the book, which I think is what's so, it's not easy when it's your own story,
Yeah.
right? And it was very much a reminder to me at the end, even as you came to the end of the book. I think that we were talking about how even the legal system, people who are going through these relationships, whether it's family court, whether it's, somebody takes advantage of you financially, a business partner, there's no good legal protections. You try taking a narcissistic person to court, and let me know how that turns out for you.
Yeah.
By the time you're out legal fees, the odds of it going your way, because it's often just happening under a radar. And even talk to you about coercion. California is one of 3 states in the United States that has coercive control laws on the books, but only in the family law, and in terms of the success of how when we try to apply it, it's hard to quantify these things. It's hard if you haven't gone through it, you don't understand. And one day what you're doing to sort of stay connected to someone, those same rationalizations you're now doing them from a place of fear, right? It goes from maintaining love to avoiding fear.
Yeah.
That's how. And when you're doing things to avoid fear, that's when it's very hard to get yourself out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, the legal system really needs an upgrade, seriously. But I hope that it does. You said that there's organizations that are working with judges, training them in what to look for in narcissistic behavior. But it can be really difficult. So there's always more to grow and more that can be done. And I really hope that my book is a first step for some people, or a midway step.
Yeah.
But I hope it helps. I hope it offers some hope.
Doubt it will help. It was wonderful. I really look forward to people reading this. If you've been through, it may not have been that you were through a cultic relationship, but that you were through a toxic relationship. And it doesn't just have to be an intimate relationship. It might be in a family. It might have been with a colleague. It might have been with a friend. But the top notes are always the same. And I think that you captured that. And I'm actually really glad you used the word cult, because it's such a stigmatized word. So many people feel so much shame. And yet many, many, many people go through this. And it is the most human parts, the most trusting, loving, believing parts of themselves that are commandeered. And that's how people get stuck. No one gets stuck because they're foolish. People get stuck because they want to love.
Thank you, Dr. Ramani.
Thank you, Joy.
Wow.